Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to prescription for business success.
Let's dive in. Well, hello, listeners. It's wonderful to be here with you all today. I am also very excited to bring a guest with Morgan and I for the recording or for the podcast. I cut that part out. Anyway, Lowell Mora from Impact CFO is here joining us today. I'm based in Chicago. I hope that's okay that I say that. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and Impact CFO, if that sounds great.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you. Thank you both ladies for having me. Again, you said my name is Lowell Mora and I run a fractional CFO firm called Impact CFO. I work primarily with and assist family-owned businesses in preparing for their transitions to other family members or their external exit planning as they need through their businesses. So I'm really excited to be here. And how do I come to this? I come to this through 35 years of being an accountant and a CFO, working primarily with family-owned businesses. Probably worked with 6 different family-owned businesses over the last 25 years, and had the good fortune of assisting 2 of those recently to successful external exits before endeavoring on my own business initiative.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I know you and I met a while back here and have had wonderful conversations. For our listeners, we had 30 minutes scheduled and we were clearly not done with our conversation after about 1 hour and 10. So if you have a chance to talk with Lowell, you'll hear so much and learn so much, which I think is really, really awesome. But I did want to kind of ask you, because I work with family businesses as well. And I know that there's definitely some unique challenges and actually benefits that come out of that. And I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about kind of what your understanding is of family business and some of the things you've experienced over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some tremendously interesting and unique experiences. The first thing that I love about family businesses, as compared to during my career, I have worked a bit early in my career for publicly traded companies, and then sort of at the end worked some with some private equity owned businesses and other types of arrangements. What I love about it is that you're able to take a mid to long-term perspective on the growth and profitability of a business. You're not playing to the whims of Wall Street and quarter to quarter, or to the cycles of an investor who wants to invest for 3 to 5 years and make have a transaction. So, because I think that when you do that, there's a sub-optimization in the overall true growth and value creation for a business. The biggest challenge that I've seen outside of all of the human things in family-owned businesses, that while you have that long-term strategy, a lot of times businesses lose a sense of urgency. So the through line through my career as an employee of family-owned businesses is it's awesome. We work with a mid to long-term strategy, but that doesn't mean we lose our sense of urgency. And where it gets really challenging is when family members don't have that same sense of urgency, and then that's permeated or driven down to the employees in the business, who also have a unique, different perspective, because they're almost, in a lot of cases, treated like family. And right. Your job in some cases is like a birthright, or it's very difficult to get taken out. So it's a lot of interesting balances that go on. And that's even before we get into all the personality issues and family issues, which, you guys deal with a lot more than I do. So
Yeah, personally, yes. I work in a family-owned company,
Yeah.
and I am family within that company, and so I completely understand that. I've had variety of family members that have come in and gone out of the organization, not necessarily in a bad way going out, but they find something else that's their true niche.
Right.
But it's definitely very interesting to see. We only have 3 family members at our organization, but you definitely see that feeling of a family oriented type
Right.
of company. We know everyone's kids, we know the spouses, we know, like, in a close knit community almost within
Mhm.
that company.
So the really hard part, and I've seen companies do it well and not do it well, is what happens sometimes is then it's hard to separate the business decisions from the personal relationships. And then if a person is not doing their job or is not qualified for their job, you still have to make those tough decisions to run your business. And that becomes even tougher. And I've seen some businesses that have done that well and some that haven't done that well.
Mhm.
And it's very hard. It's easy for me to say I'm not the owner or I don't own the business, but it's really tough. So
Yeah, and sometimes I'm sure, there's a limit where they want this person in their space, or they want to personally be in this space, but they might not be the best person for that
right,
role,
right,
say. And so it's really hard to kind of get them to buy into maybe a different structure of some
yeah,
sort. I feel like in our 3 family members that are still there, like, I don't feel like we have much trouble when it comes to that. But I feel other individuals on the team have had a hard time buying and saying, oh no, maybe I'm not right for this role. And that's not just family, it's also just regular employees that
yeah,
oftentimes don't realize that they might not be the best fit for a supervisory role. They might be a better operations leader instead of a people leader.
exactly. And that's one of the other issues that I always talk about. I don't even know if we talked about this one, Elizabeth, but this has been
Yeah.
one of my through lines through my career is self-awareness. And a
Mhm.
lot of times people are not particularly self-aware. So for instance, I've been a CFO forever, and I can't tell you the number of times somebody in a business has said to me, hey, maybe you should be the CEO or you should do that. I go, I don't think I want to be the CEO. I'm really comfortable in the role that I provide, and this is where I can add the most value. But people sometimes get caught up in, well, I could make more money, or I want to be the person that drives it, and that's very difficult. In particular, when you have family members who may not be qualified to do something, and that's
Yeah.
not a criticism of them. That's the reality. So.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting because in my experience working on that people side, right, and the kind of the development of leaders and future generations kind of within the succession plan, it's like you said, I've seen some do it really well, seen some that have struggled for various reasons. And I think one of the interesting dynamics that comes up for some of my clients is when there's maybe two or three, maybe more generation or one generation, but they're all in the same generation, and they're trying to figure out, well, who's going to be the best fit for the succession plan? Who's our next CEO? And then it becomes kind of a question, I think, of yes, there's the personality, yes, there's all of these things, but then do we as a company have the capacity to financially support the development of all of these family members or all of these people,
Mhm.
right? And I know that's something that you probably intimately know, right? Because a lot of times the development of people, it's not as tangible. You don't see it like getting a product in your hand, right? But you do see it in the long run. And that's where I come in is kind of helping some of those people who are maybe second, third generation figure out, is this right for me? But also, is it right for the business? And I'm curious if you have some of that experience as well.
Well, the interesting part is, I think, as we get as the newer, younger generations like you people come in, I don't mean that pejoratively, you people, the younger people come in. I'm mid-50s, so I'm like one of the oldest Xers. And
Mhm.
I'm dealing with a lot of my clients that are my age, and some of them were forced or coerced to come into the business, even though they had other tremendous skills and attributes, because that's what you do. And now as their children, same as my children, I'm a business for them to come into, are coming to the age that they would do it. It's absolutely not even on the table for them because they have other interests or it's not the best option. So it's a little bit of a cultural dichotomy or change going on. The other thing is when you do have people that, and I do have a great story, and I don't know if I told you this one, Elizabeth, but I worked for a family-owned business that was a German-owned business, and we had a great relationship over here with the CEO. And our language of business, international language of business, is English. And he came to us, the CEO, who had great relationship with my boss and I, and said, "Hey, I have to do something, and I have it backstopped for you, but I have some pressure. The only other family member we have in this business is my sister, and I need to promote her to be the global CFO. And I know she's not exactly perfect to be the global CFO, but there's some dynamics here. And he says, I have the backstop of her team who Lowell, and you can work with. And if you ever have issues with lack of her, this is a closed room meeting, right? If you ever have lack of ability to do what you need to do because of her, then you have a direct line to me." And I said, "That's great. We can work through it," because I knew her lieutenants and they were great. And I said, but his name was Andreas. I said, "Andreas, but did you know that your sister that you're promoting to be the global CFO and we operated in, 80 countries or 50, whatever it was, she doesn't speak English well enough to conduct business. You can have dinner with her, you can have a conversation, but she doesn't speak English well enough to have a to conduct business." And he said, "Well, I never really thought about that because I always speak to her in German." And so he had already put some backstops in place, but then this gave him some insights into her needing to improve her English in order to do her job. But it's just amazing how two things there is. One, people making decisions don't always have all the facts or all the impacts to people, even though they've put some backstops in place. And most people, I mean, I'm not most people, obviously, but most people wouldn't have the courage or the backbone to say to the CEO of the company, "Hey, but she doesn't do this." And I mean, I've always had the attitude, if somebody doesn't like what I say, which it's the truth that's going to help all of us, then, then that's not really people I want to work with. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics that come along. And there's a lot of, this one was interesting because this was just siblings, and there was kind of a matriarch who was very much older that was a figurehead. The father had passed away. But there's a lot of long-term dynamic strife, and I'm sure you see this between, in particular, fathers and sons.
Yes.
And I would say those fathers that are in their 80s or 90s and sons that are grown people who are still living in the shadow of their father and still somewhat being second guessed. Now, it doesn't have to be men. It just seems to be more men in these roles in the industrial businesses I've been in. But I can't even imagine, my dad was a salesman, and I didn't have any real expectations or things to live up to. But if if you're a second or third generation and your parent was the dynamic person that really grew the business and made all these things happen, and you get put in place to run the business, and maybe you don't have those same skill sets, or you're not that person. It doesn't mean you're not a good person.
Right.
You're not a visionary. You're not a growth. It's really got to be very psychologically difficult. So
those are the meetings I've been in, whether it's a board meeting because, maybe, dad or mom, even in that case too, stepped away from the business, for retirement or whatever it may be, but still want to be involved because it's something they help build. I've seen it, again, like you said, go really well. And, where there's just a camaraderie that, in all honesty, there's one organization that I work with, and I am just amazed every time I meet with them because they do so well. They have 3 generations kind of shaping, I guess, the organization. One that has kind of stepped away, yes, but is still there to be the support. And it's just so like inspiring to see. But then I've worked with other folks, particularly in the manufacturing space, where it's, you know, it's a little bit more challenging because the way that, you know, the new CEO wants to run the company and take it is not the way that it was originally set up, or the viewpoint of the, you know, the first generation or second generation. And that does become a bit of a challenge. I will tell you, funny enough, though, that is my favorite part of what I do, is being
Building
able to,
alignment.
I love it because I love let's cut through it, you know, and it does become a question oftentimes because, like you said, and when you said, sometimes people don't like what I have to say. That's true for me, and I know that's true for Morgan too, is that we both do that. Well, we're going to say it anyway. I always ask, is this personal or is this business? And if you can't give me an answer, it's not the right time to discuss it. We need to figure that out first. And I think there's value there.
Yeah. Well, I can personally relate to all of this, you know. It's funny that Lowell, you say, you know, it's typically like, it seems like it's like more father-son driven. And I mean, when you really take into account the timelines of business and when women really got into working and yada, yada, when you think of like the 80-year-old father figure, that makes sense that more men were usually leading businesses or in business. Now we're seeing that change. And now we're seeing the younger generation, more women getting involved, or even the wives having gotten involved, or the sisters, whomever else, or the matriarch, as you say. So I feel like it makes sense timeline wise, but personally, I definitely hear a lot of what you say. You know, my father was kind of forced into the company as well as his siblings, but he definitely seemed to work there the most. He ended up taking over the company, yada, yada. Sister and I had the choice. I ended up going in with the company in 2020 during the pandemic, knowing that, you know, it's crunch time. You know, the family company is going to need help. So I left what I was doing previously, came over, didn't have to, but I chose to. Knew I was always going to work with the company at some point. That is why I went for industrial organizational psychology, was the leadership side of things, you know, building a hierarchy in the organization where people do in fact want to follow the values and the mission of the organization and feel like they have autonomy, so that the owners, the family, doesn't feel as though they are the only ones trying to push the company forward, to trying to create that more general consensus across the organization. So it's funny, I definitely have those personal ties, but there's actually a company I kind of want to highlight here, called Doyon's Appliance. It's actually based in Massachusetts. They have a couple different locations, family friends of ours. And so interestingly enough, the person that was set to be the next CEO, it was the brother of another of the current CEO. And there was a little bit of an age gap, but not a huge one. And he actually said, no, because the next CEO after me is going to be this person. He's ready. Put him in that position now, because I'm retiring within 5 years. He had the bandwidth to know, yes, I know I can do this job, but for the company's sake, you know, financially, it makes more sense because of that changeover and what that's going to look like. If you did it twice versus once, culturally, it made sense. So to be able to say that, I think, is so important. And this company, it's crazy because it has so many family members in it. So many. Definitely more male driven within the family, but I think there's more men in the family in general. But it's very interesting to see that there are so many family members in this company. You know, my friend, she's actually the youngest of 32 cousins, I think.
Wow.
So you can, the big company.
Yeah. So it's really interesting you say that, because that doesn't mean the gentleman who said, I don't want to be the CEO, that doesn't mean he's not going to be around for 5 years guiding the younger generation. It's just about where do I sit? And he doesn't necessarily need that, I don't know what the word is, that power structure or the fame or the attention of being the CEO. And that's really, I think that's pretty rare. But that's amazing that they can have that many family members that, you know where to be and where to stay in their lanes. It's really interesting. So the other really interesting thing, and again, I think I told Elizabeth this when we met, I'm the father of 3 daughters. So I'm, you know, not about just men coming into things at all. I have 2 daughters in college and one who's still in high school. They, not only are you looking at what they do, but coming into what you do, and they have no interest in anything I'm involved in at all, which, is fine. And they should do whatever they want to do. Right. You see these families of, they have 5 kids and every kid's an engineer. Well, they can't all want to be engineers. There had to be something driven there. But you have to have that drive and the desire. And it's really exciting to hear, Morgan, somebody like you who studied industrial psychology and then coming into a business, and I'm sure you look relatively young, but you're going to grow with your academic knowledge of how do we manage people and how do we grow people and how do we work with people into the business side of things, because that's not typically what's happening today. So
no, our implementation, it's drastically different. I was talking, we have our business meeting for the new year earlier, like in December. We finalize our buckets for the new year, quote unquote, and make sure we're all aligned. So important, because I have ideas that I want to implement. The company is drastically different than when it was started in 1965. My grandfather started the company. But definitely I'm bringing ideas constantly. And what's great is we have a want to learn from each other and to know that, okay, this person's better in this area, this person's better in this area, this person's better in this area. And that's why I'm chief people officer, because I lead the people and I lead the culture and I lead the hierarchy of the team. I also do obviously lots of organizational development. And, I kind of get my hands everywhere, from marketing to the statistical tracking of the production unit, everything I could do.
That's awesome.
But I think all of the things that you do, and I know we're kind of making this a bit of a case study, but I think it's a good thing, because it's similar to what I am seeing out there, right? So it's a good thing that you're getting that experience in those areas, because the succession plan, right? Like, if the succession plan, I'm not like throwing things out there, but like for any family business, if the succession plan is that you will eventually, the idea is you will be CEO someday and you will be running the business, having some working knowledge of what those different areas are all about can be so important. So take, for example, one of my clients kind of started, I would say probably tagged as the next CEO would be my guess. They did a wonderful job, I will tell you, too, of starting about 10 years in advance, which I think a lot of companies don't do. They kind of go, well, I'm going to retire next year, so we got to find a CEO.
You need time for that transition.
Yeah, like you need to learn it, right? But it kind of started from like the culture and people perspective, and now is incorporating, the management of finance and the management of IT, as well as kind of the culture and people aspects. And I think that change in title is a direct result of what you're talking about, which is getting experience in all of those areas, which is all a developmental activity to get this person ready for what comes next. Do you know what I mean?
It's really interesting what you say, because the planning and 10 years out, 10 years seems like a long time, but 10 years goes by fast.
It does.
And it's really interesting, because not only does the senior exec or the older exec, you might talk to somebody when they're 50 and they say, or 45, and they say, yeah, I want to retire in 10 years, or I want to retire when I'm 60. I can tell you from personal experience, as you cross that 55 point, and then all of a sudden 60 doesn't seem that far away, you may have a change in opinion and realize, well, I'm not ready to do whatever. So from the psychological standpoint of it is preparing somebody for what their life is going to be like. They're outside of business life, right? So we all have a lot of activities and things we do, but a portion of it is your business and your challenges and your professional challenges. And you just have to be able to be flexible to change that as you go. And that's something like you with these fancy psychology degrees and all that, me can't do. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday it happened to be with somebody, a gentleman running a business who was 45 years old, and then somebody a bit older than me, early 60s. And the 45-year-old said, yeah, I'm definitely want to be done when I'm 60. And I said, well, let's talk in 10 years to see what it looks like and what you're going to do with your time then. So it's an evolution. But like everything, you need to have some flexibility in it, right? Because if you're prepared for it, and the exec that's looking to pass it down, say when they're 60, gets there and says, hey, I'm not really ready, that doesn't mean the next person is not going to be the CEO. But you say, okay, for the next couple years, we're going to transition responsibilities. I'm going to start, you've done that already, but you have to be able to be flexible with that. And
Yeah.
that the answer isn't which companies did for years and years in 80s, 90s, and 2000s. When somebody was done, okay, they get put to a position that you're like the quality control person or the project guy, because that
Right.
means you're done. So it's really
Yeah.
it's got to be a holistic planning process that has some flexibility.
Absolutely.
Are there any specific strategies that you've implemented when you've been helping with those generational transitions within an organization?
I mean, it's hard because those are really hard discussions to have. So you don't just, I mean, you're in an organization that is your family and you run. Elizabeth goes in and helps people.
Yeah.
I've always said that you have to really build a trust and rapport with the people you're working with before they'll trust you to talk about those things.
Right.
And then you have to really get there. And it's more or less, Morgan, there's no magic bullet. It's are you in a position to have the trust and respect of the business people you're working with to have those tough conversations? I mean, I've sat in front of business owners and said, you've got people in this organization that are in your family and you're paying them a lot of money and they're not qualified to do the job.
Right.
They're not doing the job, and shake their head and they say yes. And, after hearing it for a period of time, sometimes it takes years for them to understand how can I make this change, right? Because there's that balance between, do you have this job and this salary because this is your name? And do you have it because you're able to do the job that's there? So I don't have a magic bullet, but it's all situational. I think one of the key things, if you don't mind me segueing here,
No.
is that leads to and this is a big, big issue out there, is the difference between being a family employee of a business and the ownership structure.
Yeah.
So there's a huge gray area in that. And just because your name is X or you work in the business and your name is X, that doesn't mean you own the business. So what needs to be very clearly defined at any point in time is, so I give you an example. If Morgan works in the business, let's just say Morgan works in the business, you're the only family member there. And let's say you have two other siblings. So by heir rights, there's three people, but you get to the point that your parents own the whole business and and Morgan's going to take over. It's a arm's length transaction where Morgan would buy the business from her parents, and then the other siblings aren't involved in it, and they would get their share of whatever it is through the true inheritance in the unfortunate circumstance when the parents would pass away. Instead of having this nebulous thing, well, I have some ownership or I don't, and you wouldn't believe the number of companies who don't have it well defined and written down on paper, because some of the older generations, and I'm not talking about people my age or like your parents' age, like the 80 and 90-year-old guys, everything was loosey-goosey on the back of an envelope. And you come into these situations, and I've seen it, where the ownership structure is not well defined. And you've got siblings in the business who've been there a long time. You've got siblings who want to be in the business, and you've got siblings who have nothing to do with the business. And in the end, all that brings is family strife. And, my big question always to everybody is, all my clients, I go, did everybody come to Thanksgiving dinner? And was everybody able to be happy and be together? And you get differing answers. But the really hard part, and I'm sure you've seen this, Morgan, is the loneliest job in the world is being the CEO. Second loneliest job in the world is being the CFO. But it gets pushed to even another level of being a CEO of a family-owned business. Because when I go to Thanksgiving dinner, nobody's talking. They might ask me what I'm doing and how my business is. But when you go to Thanksgiving dinner, you could have a bunch of family members who are pissed off at you, and are ruining your Thanksgiving dinner because there's all kinds of family stuff going on. So it's really lonely. And that's where CEOs of family-owned businesses need counseling, advice, support. So I gave you a lot right there, but
no, I think it's important, if you don't have a clear line of how the company transitions, if it's inherited, if there's another way to buy into the company, if there's not a clear expectation or a clear written down plan for how people can get involved or not get involved, I guess, then it does in fact create that family strife. We definitely saw that in the first generational shift of our organization, though there's been major improvements since then. I would say that it really doesn't exist anymore, but it had back when the inheritance, quote unquote, happened. It was a okay company. It managed it survived, I guess, until it was taken over by the second generation, and then only one person worked in it out of those family members, and they bought out the rest of the inheritance because no one else wanted to be involved, and obviously turned negative because companies started to succeed after that, yada yada yada. But definitely there needs to be a clear expectation, a clear knowledge within the family itself of what the organization is, the financial benefits or lack thereof at the organization, I guess how those financials also affects the family dynamic. If there's an understanding of what is within the company across the family, it might affect who decides that they want to in fact be involved within the inheritance, rather than family companies where there's people that inherit the company, have no idea what happens in it. And then that's usually what causes the family strife, is they don't understand what happens in it. And then one side or the other takes advantage.
Yeah. It's really, go ahead, Elizabeth. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just really going to quickly say it's a teeny tangent that I promise I'll bring us back to. Have either of you seen the HBO series Succession?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. One of my favorite shows. And as you are all talking and as I'm listening to kind of all of this, obviously it's a TV show, it's a series. So for those who haven't seen, it's definitely dramatized. I mean, there are components that I've seen in real life business for sure. But what it really brings me to, and this is where I tie it back to the conversation, just so you know, is it's all about communication and two-way communication, because that series is all, it's all about pushing down to the next generation. This is how it's going to be done. And then it creates conflict. I would recommend it to anyone watching it. But when you can have that conversation and be raw with one another, but be able to kind of set it aside and say, you know what, now we're going to go to Thanksgiving dinner, or now we're going to go to, granddaughter's birthday party or whatever it is, because that's what's needed in that moment. I think that's really important. And that's a skill that, it's hard to develip at times.
You have to separate the two. You have to.
And like something I do for myself from like a strategy perspective that I work with people on at times. I always say to myself, like, is this worth my energy? If it's not worth my energy, then I'm not going to give it my energy. Like it's a kind of a willpower thing. And I will tell you, it's funny because a lot of my clients now use that, and they'll say, Elizabeth, it's just not worth my energy. And like, great, that's good to know. And I think having just some of those things kind of in your back pocket, if you're consulting or if you're working in the business, can be really helpful in helping people move forward, So I just had to throw that out there. Yeah, I think we should post a link to that show. I don't know if it's still only on HBO, but it's such a good.
It's great. And it really highlights one of the other huge issues, which is the patriarch or the older member not wanting to give up control.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's extreme, and that was supposedly based on the Murdochs and Fox News and all that. But I've seen that at times where you have a person running the business who's in their 80s and they won't give it up, and it's very, very difficult because that's where people like you come involved, who are business people that understand the psychology and have to work through these family dynamics. So really interesting. So.
Yeah. Well, I think too, at times, I mean, it's definitely, yes, it's the psychology, and it's sometimes like a restructure of sorts is needed. Not I don't want to say kind of just the organizational flow, and the organizational chart may need to change a little bit. And so, maybe that's, the first generation, 80-year-old or whatever it may be is, sitting on a board and has some say as to the direction of the company, but the day-to-day operations are really up to kind of the executive team in place. And sometimes you have to restructure that executive team and redistribute power, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think that it can be really challenging emotionally, and I recognize that, and I think there's a place to validate that for people, and at the same time recognize that it's business, and if you want the business to move forward, and a lot of people are relying on the business, you have to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The really hard part is, and I think you and I talked a bit about this when we met, is there's a generational identity thing happening. And the boomer generation, so many of those people that are running businesses, their entire identity is wrapped up in their business. That's driven by being children of people who lived through the Depression.
Right.
And they don't see their business as an asset or a vehicle. They see it as an income stream. And they can't imagine what they're going to do in their life without that business. Now, when you come down to me, like my generation, we're a little bit different, because I always say I'm setting my business up that I can do this for 10 or 15 years and have some flexibility and do some things. But if somebody came to me tomorrow and said, you have enough money and there's, for some reason, you can't do your business anymore, I have a list of about 80 things that I would do. I would miss that challenge, but I would be okay with it. And that's that generation. But I'm the grandchild of people who lived through the Depression. So I heard all those stories, but it wasn't my parents. My parents did their own number on me because of what their generation was. But it's really interesting. And that's the challenge. And what's really happening out there is, and I have pretty good statistics on this, is 47.7% of family-owned businesses are ending up in bankruptcy within 2 years of the death of the founder or the current owner. And that's because they're not addressing what's out there. They're either saying, they're not like Morgan's family and Morgan's company, that they're bringing the people in. They're saying, well, none of my kids want to do it, and I'm just going to ignore it instead of dealing with the fact that I might have to sell this business. It's amazing that your business is in the third generation, because only one of three businesses make it to the second generation, and only 1 in 8 make it to the third generation. Now, the ones that do are really, really awesome.
Yes.
But you have to have some real insights and planning to do that. So.
Yeah. I would say that, we're getting better with our planning over time. But really it is so important. It's that communication channel, as Elizabeth was saying, and, just having some sort of written down plan, or even just mental plan, even if it's not written down, if you have some idea of what's going to come, then it's going to lead the business to being more successful. I know businesses around us that we ended up actually getting previous employees of theirs because they were doing layoffs. They're small companies doing layoffs because they're going into the second or third generation and they're not managing the workload. And, we end up reaping the benefits from that, because we have some really strong managers and supervisors from those businesses that are now part of our team. And, we are on that threshold for growth. We see a spike in growth every few years, especially with our different product lines coming out. And I can't be more excited to see it unravel. But then I have other family companies I know that are either trying to plan their succession plan right now. Like I have a friend who, it's between him and his stepbrother, taking over the company, and they're trying to work on that succession plan at the moment. And then, Doyon's Appliance, like I mentioned, that one, they really have a great plan in place already. I believe it's their third generation right now. But they also have, a fourth generation that's young, like in their tweens or younger right now. And so you can already see that this company is really really growing. And, if you have that plan, you're going to be just that much more successful and less stressed when it comes to the transition and or sale. Some companies do decide to sell for their exit.
Right. Well, it's really interesting because things come full circle in life. So I actually have my family's been out of it now for 2 generations, but there was a family-owned business that was started by my great-grandfather,
Mhm.
which is now in its 5th generation. I've been out, my side of the family's been out for 2 generations, but when I walk into it's a small business, a jewelry business, but when I walk into there and the 5th generation gentleman now who's 40 years old is running it, I have a lot of pride in it because it was what my grandfather built. But it was very clear that it wasn't a big enough business to, to support or have many multiple business owners in it. And we were brought up and said, no, that's not the business for you.
Mhm.
You go to college and do this and do that. But I always have that. It's kind of interesting how things happen, and I've come full circle back to working in family-owned business. What happened in my family was that my side of the family, the daughters, my mother and her sister, women weren't going into the businesses in the 50s and 60s, so they
Right.
were said, go get married, raise a family. That's not right, but and so it went to the other side of the family. So it's just,
Right.
but it's a tremendous pride thing to walk into a 5th generation business,
Mhm.
and ours happens to be in the same building that it's always been in, which is really cool. So
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
I mean, I think that also plays a part into why you do what you do, is like you've seen how a business can transition and how certain generations can transition out. You were told this isn't what you're doing. Go figure out what you want to do. In fact, that's actually what I was told too. Lo and behold, I ended up back in the business. My sister, though, is a physical therapist. So, we're in the sports world. So I run marathons and I do sports, and she's my physical therapist in turn, as well as actually my aunt, funny enough, is also a PT. But, definitely you see things come full circle. We're built by a mix of our personality and then what we were taught. And you clearly were taught that sometimes it's not a fit for everybody, or sometimes it's not right from one side or the other. It doesn't mean you're not a fit for a certain role, but now you're driving that home with other companies that likely are still struggling with it.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It's really interesting as you guys, you'll get older and have more experiences where things like all start crystallizing together, and you see the through lines of your career and your life, and it's really interesting. So
Yeah.
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 Well, not to completely switch over, but knowing you're a CFO, I
Yeah.
really want to understand what the financial component looks like for you when you're working with these organizations. What comes into play? What do you typically want them to touch on?
yeah.
Small
So
stuff.
the most important thing is, and I work primarily with smaller businesses, 5 to 50, 75 million, that don't necessarily have the finance and accounting firepower, right? So
Mhm.
the first thing that I say is what do your financials look like? And sometimes I'll get the answer, I don't know. I just turn them over. I have a guy who does it. I turn them over. We do our taxes. If we have enough money, we take some money. So I say, well, how do you then know, first of all, what your cash flow looks like? Because
Right.
businesses don't go bankrupt because their sales or their operations aren't good. They go bankrupt because they run out of cash. And just
Right.
because your P&L or your balance sheet might look okay, doesn't mean your cash flow is good. So I say, we got to start looking at your cash flow and analyzing that. Well, I just keep $2 million or $3 million in the bank. Well, that's maybe not the best option, and suboptimization. That's
Cash
suboptimization
flow.
because they say, again, certain businesses will just say, well, I spend money when I know I have money in the bank, and that's not good planning.
Yeah.
Right.
So first thing I say is we got to get financial straight, and then I say to them, this is not as financial as you would think. I'd say, what you guys do, I said, what are your business goals, right? Or first I say, what are your personal goals? And
Mhm.
secondly, what are your business goals, right? So, well, and then if they can tell you what their personal goals are, this is what I need, this is what I don't need, this is it, then how do you translate to your business goals? And so my end operation is, do you want to continue running this business
Right.
and grow it, or do you want to plan for some type of an exit or transition? Now, the end goal is always, whichever one of you're doing, the end goal should be to increase the total value of the business, right? Shareholder value. That's all you need to do. Now, there's different avenues to get to that, right? And I'm kind of spinning around getting to the answer, but
Yeah.
it's not a one size fits all. The first thing is understanding your financials, and then it's what do you want to do with the business and crafting a strategy to get to where you want to be. I see every business, and if it's any good, I want to grow the business, but it's not my business, right? And I don't have the true risk. So I listen and go in and find out, what do you want to do? The other piece that's really interesting, and I'd be interested to hear what you say about your business, Morgan, is typically family-owned businesses have zero debt. Okay. And they have zero debt because they're risk averse and they've always been that way, and they don't want to owe anybody, blah, 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 which is fine. But beyond that, the next level is, are they even reinvesting their profits and their free cash flow back in the business? So I've worked for businesses where I see them, and at good big-sized businesses, they're spitting off $20 million of EBITDA or free cash flow a year, and they're pulling it out. Owners are pulling it out. And I say, okay, you don't want to have any debt, but I can't believe there's not any new projects, developments, things in this business that we could use this $20 million for, that would have a better net present value, net profit potential than putting it in your T-bills or your stock thing. Now, that's a pretty generic discussion, but it's that appetite for growth, and it's the appetite for risk. And family-owned businesses typically are very, very conservative. So I try to have those discussions and balance that conservative nature with what's your true desire, and how do we get to the appropriate appetite for risk and growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, even our company, we run on a conservative side, but we are growing. One of our taglines the past few years is actually "Here we grow again," because we keep, implementing more into our domestic manufacturing unit. We have a manufacturing unit right within Massachusetts. We built a whole nother, like one of our previous buildings, we still use as a warehouse, but we retrofitted it to a whole another part of our manufacturing unit. We've tripled the size of our manufacturing unit actually since 2019. We doubled the size in 2020, despite the pandemic on top of everything, but debt-free while doing this. And the thing is, you're kind of speaking our CEO's language of cash flow. That's what he talks about every single week is, this is what I want to see for the cash flow. I want to see this cash flow increase for this purpose, for this growth purpose, yada, yada, yada. No, they're not taking money out of the company. It's constantly getting reinvested. And I think that's something different than the original generation did in our organization, which is really cool to see. This company went from being worth $250,000 to being worth 15 plus million. And so that's a big change within, less than, it was about 10, 12 years to do that. So that's a big change.
And it's again, that's the interesting part is, what do the principles of the business want to do, right? And how can you attack that? And again, typically people running a business like that, they're not needing withdrawals or their share stock to come out to pay their bills and do stuff, right? So you're getting paid enough to do what you need to do, and we're increasing the value of this business overall. And again, it's within that, you have to be flexible. And it sounds like what you got. I mean, again, I've unfortunately been through now the 2001. You guys probably weren't even born, some of you. The 2001 tech bubble, right?
It's definitely born before 2001. We just had Morgan and I just had this conversation yesterday. Actually.
But in any case, you were born, but you don't remember it. So the 2001 tech bubble really hit us, and then the 2008, 2009 crisis, right? And then just the pandemic. But if you go back and you study it, companies that take advantage of having financial strength during those times, like your company has, Morgan, come out stronger. I mean, you talk about all these businesses that came through like World War I and World War II. Those are the people that were building up and doing smart things at those times. So it seems like you guys weathered that well. The pandemic is it's a very strange one. It was very something none of us have ever seen.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be our next historic lesson. But we're going to face some type of a challenge every 10, 15 years. But it's interesting that, and you need to take the learning of that and use it prospectively, but with some deduction or knowledge that everything that happens isn't exactly the same. I work with businesses that, we got burned in 1990 on this thing and we're never going to do that again. And I said, well, it happened once. That doesn't mean that you don't watch out for it. But, the companies, family-owned business had policies, and I'm talking about big companies.
Absolutely.
Of things that happened, and I'll give you an example. It's not even a financial thing that happened. I worked for a company where one of their people that was traveling in the mid 90s was at a home office visit and got killed by a drunk driver. Mm-hmm. So after that, they were not letting, for some reason, because they were driving rental cars, for some reason, they didn't let anybody drive a rental car anymore. I said, how does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So it's just that use the history, right? But use it intelligently in the situation that we're all going to face. Absolutely. More challenges and more economic challenges, but we have to be prepared with how to do it. So.
Yeah, I have to, what I feel like this is a theme, like throughout this episode is kind of the historical part. And I think it really, what it boils down to is understanding. And what you said in the beginning is self-awareness, and kind of how those pieces come together. And it makes me think of a professor that I had when I was in my doctorate program. I'll call him out, Ken Solberg. He's still someone that I talk to today. He's really great. But I remember him he always had these mannerisms, but he'd always say, it's the zeitgeist of the times. It's the zeitgeist of the times. And we would say, like, at first I thought, I don't know what the heck. I mean, I knew what the word meant, but I didn't know what he was really talking about. But it's kind of coming full circle here now, because you're right. There were changes to the way that people had to operate and felt that they needed to operate, and the psychological impact of the Great Depression, right? My parents are, trying to think, they're my grandparents. And my parents a little bit older, but like my grandparents were, kids during the Great Depression. And so the transition down was very interesting. And then seeing again, like what my mom went through. And so it's so fascinating to listen to this, because I'm seeing it real time in my life, and how hard for my mom it was as a boomer to transition to retirement, because her work was her identity for so long. I don't feel that connection to my work. I feel that it brings me joy, it brings me fulfillment, all of those things. But like you said, Lowell, like I have about 10 million things that I want to do, and so if retirement comes at some point, when it comes, I will be okay with it. But it is different. So anyway, I just want to throw maybe word of the day is zeitgeist. We can throw that out there, and if that's okay with you guys.
No, I love that. And I think it really boils down to one of those sayings: if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And sometimes you can learn from history in the wrong way, like you kind of just said. Yeah. Sometimes you learn from history and you didn't really learn from history. You kind of you overemphasize that historical
absolutely
episode. Yeah. In a sense. And so I think it is really important to know the history of an organization, to then see how this organization, maintains its original principles, but changes with the times without, losing sight of what the company originally was made for. And I think that's really important when you are doing transitions and succession planning. Is, you can have differences of opinion on, what exact direction you're going in, what markets you're looking at, what products are your focal points. But as long as you have alignment within the actual values and mission underneath the organization, usually you're still on the right trajectory. And that succession plan, maybe, for example, we used to be focused on emblematic pins. Now our main product line is medallions. Funny enough, we're getting back into the pin business with the Made in USA sustainable product line. So you see it ebb and flow based off of the needs of the time.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Right.
Yeah. Well, okay. I have a question for the two of you, and you can totally shoot me down if you want. But as we kind of wrap up, I'm wondering if we can do a quick round robin question. Like, first thing that comes to your mind. I'm only going to give you two choices, so you don't have to think that hard. You just have to choose. Are you guys up for a little bit of a game?
Yeah, you always
Okay.
put us on the spot. Why not?
I will also participate, but I will go last if that works. So whoever wants to say it first. Okay. So we've talked about risk and risk tolerance and change. There's inherently a portion of risk, right, that comes with change. Would you say generally, if you just look at yourself as a person, not necessarily within the business you work, but just in general, do you tend to be more risk tolerant or risk averse? Morgan, go.
Risk averse.
Lowell.
I tend to be more risk tolerant.
Okay. I am also quite risk tolerant. I think maybe, I don't know if there's like a third level of I like to take risk. It's really probably
I guess I should say like I'm risk averse in the fiscal sense, but risk tolerant when it comes to people and change management, because that is literally what I do for work is change management.
Totally.
But I think more so I say risk averse because I need a plan in place to make the change.
Well, that's an interest. That might be a good
I
follow-up
like to look ahead. And so I can tolerate the risk in the sense of, pivoting as needed within that plan. But overall, I like to have it in my mind, the steps of what's happening for the change.
That's totally fair. I get that.
It's really interesting too, as you talk about your overall risk level of risk tolerance or aversion. I know you're married and you have kids. I don't know about Morgan, but like mine is driven also by my wife of 27 years, who is probably as risk averse as can possibly be.
Right.
So we have to, it's really balancing it. So it drives into all your relationships and how you do that. So
I guess that makes sense. It's the idea of like, who's the spender versus who's the saver in a relationship. So like my partner, he's more risk tolerant, I would say, and I'm the more risk averse one. But it's good because we balance each other out. Yeah,
there's got to be balance. So
I always like to think that things will work out. And if they don't, I can do something about it. So like I've always like told in college, I knew that I needed to pay for my loans and pay for all of like my housing expenses and everything. So I worked 2-3 jobs in college. I know that was very rare for people kind of in that time period, I guess. But there was a reason for that. And I think that's maybe why I'm a little bit more risk tolerant, because I know that if it doesn't work out or if I sense that it's going in a bad direction, I'll do something about it. But I also know that that's just a personality characteristic I have. So there's that. Well, thank you for playing that game with me. I appreciate it. I like to throw random things out there, as Morgan knows, and now you do too, Lowell.
It was really great speaking with you, Lowell. I feel like, our overall theme today was the idea that, it always will depend. And I've said this before, but that's why it's usually important to work with an expert in the area. So like, for example, succession planning. It's important to work with an individual that can challenge you, but they build trust first. I love how, Lowell, you said that. You build trust first, and then you're going to help them through. There's different techniques, there's different strategies for each organization. The financial management of the organization is going to change, financial planning is going to change, and the personalities within an organization really affect the way in which you plan your succession or your exit.
Right.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Thank you for joining. Thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful to talk with you again. I know you and I have a meeting coming up again too, but it was just wonderful to have you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies. Have a great day. And I'm really thankful for you having me on your show.
Absolutely. Well, listeners, this concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Always remember to stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us every Tuesday for your next Whodunit. This is Organizational Sherlocks, closing today's case.
We will see you all next time.